EDCC, Equine Disease Communication Center. How do you know how to avoid disease unless you know where it's at? This unifies the entire country for veterinarians, horse owners, all the horse-loving public to know where disease is. How can we trace it? How can we follow up? How can we prevent it coming to your backyard? Please donate.
So welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. We are really happy to have you here tonight, although I can't say we're thrilled about the circumstances that brought you here. But thank you so much for coming and listening and being a caring horse owner, manager, trainer, farrier, transporter, whatever. We are happy to have you here tonight. This is a special webinar that's brought to you both by the American Association of Equine Practitioners, the AAEP, and also the Equine Disease Communications Center, the EDCC. And we are talking this evening about the latest updates on EHV-1. Now, important notes before we start. Especially for those of you who are watching the recording of this live webinar. This session is being recorded on Tuesday, November 25th, 2025. But this is an incredibly volatile situation and things are changing by the hour. So remember that your best outlet for the most up-to-date information is your personal veterinarian and the EDCC. You can download the EDCC Disease Alerts app from your app store, as well as finding them on the web. And again, I will be posting links to those things in the chat as we go along. Also, a reminder, very sorry, but we're not going to have any chance to answer specific questions about your personal horses. And not even sure we're going to have a chance to get any questions at all, just because of how busy this is right now. But we'll see what we can do. So the American Association of Equine Practitioners is the world's largest professional membership association for equine veterinarians and vet students. And there's a good chance that your personal vet is an AAEP member. One of the primary missions of the AAEP is to deliver the latest treatments and research in equine veterinary medicine to our veterinarian members. And then this mission extends to provide quality information about the health and welfare of the horse to the clients of our member vets. That's you guys. Now, the Equine Disease Communications Center, the EDCC, is an industry-driven service which works to protect horses and the horse industry from the threat of infectious disease in North America. Our communication system is designed to seek and report real-time information about diseases and help prevent the spread of infectious disease. The EDCC relies on the generous support of sponsors and donors to continue its essential work. I'll post a link in chat to that donation page if you'd like to help us out there. And again, we appreciate your commitment to the health of your horse by being here with us tonight. Okay, now, after all of that, oh, and somebody just said when you donate to support the EDCC, if your employer has donation matching, make sure you take advantage of that opportunity. That is an excellent suggestion. Thank you so much for that. So anyway, our webinar is entitled EHV-1 Updates. And our panel of experts on this subject are Doctors Bud Dinges, who is the Texas State Veterinarian, Dr. Katie Flynn, Senior Veterinarian on Equine Health and Biosecurity for the U.S. Equestrian, and Dr. Krista Estell, infectious disease specialist at Virginia Tech's Marion DuPont Scott Equine Medical Center. And she's also a member of the AAEP's Infectious Disease Committee and the EDCC subcommittee. Once we get started, I'll ask them to introduce themselves a little further, and I'll ask them to clarify who they're representing tonight. For instance, Dr. Dinges is Texas state veterinarian and will speak tonight about Texas issues. So don't assume that what he's saying applies to all states. And again, you'll need to reach out to your personal vet and your local authorities for the most up-to-date information in your area. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Oh, quick shout out to my IT director who's hiding behind the Zoom webinar curtain. That's Kevin Hinchman. Thank you, Kevin. I hope we don't need your help tonight. All right, so with that, I believe that we are starting up with Dr. Estell. Let me know when you are ready to share your screen, and we'll get that over there as well.
Great, I am ready.
Okay, cool. Go ahead and share that. It always takes a moment for it to fire up. Here we go. Okay.
How's that looking?
All right, that is looking good.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here today, even though, none of us want to be in the middle of this outbreak. Today I'm going to talk about EHV. I've been manning the EDCC Facebook page in the last couple of days, and so a lot of your questions I've done my best to answer, but they're also pretty comprehensive, and a lot of it just needs a general virus review. And so we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk specifically about the neurologic manifestation of EHV, and then I'm going to talk just a little bit about the Equine Disease Communication Center, what we do, how we do it, and why we need all the help we can get. So I am a veterinarian, practicing veterinarian. I'm an internal medicine specialist, and so I do have a special interest in infectious disease and neurologic disease in horses. I'm a Virginia Tech graduate for vet school. I'm a Maryland native. Spent a year in Ocala, Florida, really memorable year doing an internship down there. And then went out and did a residency at UC Davis. When I was at Davis, I had my first exposure to EHV-1 and the EHM outbreak that was centered around the Ogden, Utah National Cutting Horse show. And so had the honor of treating those horses and meeting those clients. And I'm really sad to see this happening to our Western performance horses again. But I'm, like I said, really glad to be here today. So let's talk a little bit about equine herpes virus. So there's many different equine herpes viruses. We're going to focus on EHV-1 today, but the clinically relevant viruses, herpes viruses, are 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they cause lots of different disease manifestations. EHV-1 and EHV-4, most common of those viruses, and they generally just cause fever and respiratory disease, though they may also cause abortion or neurologic disease. Of EHV-1 and EHV-4, EHV-1 is much more likely to cause neurologic disease than EHV-4. It's really quite rare for EHV-4 to cause any neurologic signs at all. Talking about transmission, so the virus is shed most efficiently from nose-to-nose contact, though it can be shed just by aerosolized virus particles. And that means that all horses that are relatively close to each other in a shared airspace can shed the virus. One that's shedding the virus, a horse nearby, can contract it. And so that's something to think about when Dr. Flynn is going to talk to us about biosecurity and how to isolate and quarantine these horses. It's an aerosolized virus that can be shed in airspace with each other. And then notably, the virus can also be transmitted by fomites. So not direct horse-to-horse contact, but by their human caretakers, by our clothing or boots, by hoses or water buckets quite efficiently, actually, and then any tack or shared equipment and the stall and the environment that these horses are staying in. Environmental contamination is a really important thing to consider. while the virus is exposed to light and air, it doesn't last very long in the environment, but in wet or shady areas, it can persist for up to 21 days. And so that's something to consider again when you're considering biosecurity in your home barn. Okay, a little bit about the disease mechanics or the pathogenesis of this virus. So this virus is shed and transmitted by nose-to-nose contact, and the respiratory tract is the primary site of infection. The virus goes there first and then infects the local lymph nodes of the head and neck. The virus is then within the local lymph nodes carried in the white blood cells, and particularly the monocytes, which are a type of white blood cell, carried throughout the body. And then the white blood cells are in the bloodstream, and viremia is the word for that. So viremia is virus in the bloodstream. So the incubation period for equine herpes virus, or the amount of time from disease exposure to clinical signs, is generally about 2 to 10 days. However, that initial fever or lethargy that horses might get from viral exposure can go unnoticed, right? These are herd animals. We don't spend every moment of the day with them. And if they're stoic, then we might not notice them being a little bit off. And so that initial fever or not feeling well, it might go unnoticed. The onset of neurologic signs may be longer than 10 days. So maybe they had some low-grade fever, weren't quite right on day 5 to 7, and then you think you're in the clear, you're after day 10, but then the neurologic signs can start afterwards. Talking about EHV-1, EHV-1 can cause several different types of disease, and all of the disease manifestations are shown on this slide. In many cases, EHV-1 is asymptomatic. So horses are exposed to it, they get the virus, but they have no clinical signs of disease at all. They might get a respiratory form, which I'll go over in the next couple slides. And they might get a neurologic form, or in some cases in pregnant mares, they might have an abortion as a result of the viral infection. So EHV-1 is quite a common virus, and many horses are exposed to EHV-1 at some point in their life. Once they've had the exposure, many of them, up to 80% actually, can develop a latent infection of the virus in their lymph nodes or actually within their nerve roots in the nerve ganglion. And so the virus can live and hang out there, and then they may asymptomatically start shedding that virus at any time. We wish we knew all the triggers that would cause a horse that's latently infected to start shedding the virus, but what we know is that stress is likely a factor. And things like shipping and transporting horses, having them in a different environment, are all causes of stress. We know that shipping is a known immune suppressant. And so if we wanted to make a model for a horse to see if it would get a disease from being stressed out, we would trailer them. And so that shows you how effectively these horses that are latently affected, asymptomatic, can then go to a show or an event and then start shedding the virus unbeknownst to anyone. As far as the respiratory manifestation, EHV-1 is a relatively mellow virus. So in general, these horses will get a fever. Reminder, a fever in a horse is any temperature over 1015. However, if you're temperature checking your horse regularly, you know where your horse lives under normal conditions, right? So you might be able to be clued into, oh, it's usually 99.3, but it's chilly outside and my horse is 100.9. I'm going to check again in a couple of hours and see if he's still okay. But we consider a fever anything over 101.5. They might also have clinical signs of lethargy, and then they often start to get those upper respiratory tract infection signs. So that's a nasal discharge or an intermittent cough. One of the things that we often see is also a swelling of the distal limbs or a stocking up, and I'll explain why that happens in a couple slides here. So EHV-1 is generally the respiratory form is not doesn't make horses incredibly ill, and most of them shake it off without any issues or any interventions by us. In some cases, these horses can develop a secondary bacterial pneumonia, and they might need treating, particularly if these horses were just transported from one place to another, makes them more likely to get that secondary bacterial pneumonia. Now we'll go ahead and talk about the neurologic manifestation of EHV-1 or EHM, which is equine herpes virus myeloencephalopathy. Let's break down that word a little bit real quick. Myeloencephalopathy means the brain or the spinal cord and inflammation there. So EHM occurs when the virus that's in the bloodstream, that viremia, will trigger inflammation of the blood vessels, which is known as vasculitis. It will also trigger the coagulation cascade. And so these horses have inflamed small blood vessels, and then they actually get spontaneous blood clots within the small vessels of the brain and spinal cord. And I've got two images here that are tissue from the brain and spinal cord of a horse that unfortunately did not make it with EHM. The image, that's the microscopic image. I'm not sure if people can see my arrow, but the microscopic image on the left side of the screen is actually a small blood vessel that is completely thrombosed. It's completely filled with a blood clot. And then you can actually see these purple cells here are white blood cells. And that vessel is completely thrombosed. There's no blood going through it, which means there's no oxygen getting to the brain in that case. And in the image on the right, these are sections of spinal cord. And so they're cut kind of like spinal cord looks a bit like string cheese. If that freaks you out, I'm sorry about that. But when it's cut in half, it looks a bit like string cheese. And here, these darker tan areas are the macroscopic view of what happens when that blood flow is cut off. And so that's areas where all of the tracts have been damaged from lack of blood flow. And then we get clinical signs as a result. Here's an example. So here's, I put some really helpful arrows in. Sorry, I forgot this slide was here. So you can actually see where those blood clots were and the damage to the spinal cord. Okay. So one of the questions that I've been seeing a lot on the EDCC website, as well as some other Facebook pages, are about viral strains and does the strain matter? The answer is we used to think it did, and now that we've learned more from different outbreaks, we know that it doesn't matter as much as we thought it did. So 2 and now 3 different viral genotypes have been identified. We've got one that's D752, which is a neuropathogenic. It was what it used to be called, neuropathogenic. We've got one that was called the wild type, and then a recent discovery of H752. We know now that all of these strains can actually cause neurologic disease. And so truly, the strain does not matter when we think about the likelihood of our horse getting neurologic disease as a result of EHV-1. What we do see is that some outbreaks seem to result in more severe disease than others, but we're still gathering data about this particular outbreak. And so, one of the things that we do, in addition to report real life alerts, is gather data so that we can learn from the outbreaks and hopefully prevent things like this in the future. So what are the clinical signs of EHM? What happens when we get those blood clots in the brain or spinal cord? And the hallmark clinical signs of EHM are hind limb weakness and ataxia. And ataxia just means uncertain footfall placement. The horse looks unbalanced and you're not certain where their footfall pattern is going to be next. They'll generally start with just toe dragging. And so one of the first things owners will notice is that they go into the stall and their horse is making little pathways with their feet. They're dragging their toes through the shavings. And that'll be one of the first things that a lot of owners will notice. And then in many cases, that progresses to hind limb weakness and actual dog sitting, like the horse is showing on the left. Horses will often develop urine dribbling, and so that means they're unable to produce a full stream of urine. Instead, they just will dribble urine, and they can even have an inability to pass manure. I've got a horse on the right side of the screen that's actually being supported in a sling in this case, but you can tell he would be dog sitting or laying down without that sling supporting him. However, those are the hallmark clinical signs, but the clinical signs of EHM are really variable, and they're based on the location of those small blood clots and where they cause brain or spinal cord damage. Brain damage does happen in these horses. Encephalopathy, that means inflammation of the brain or pathology of the brain. And in these cases, we can see the horse's mentation change, so they might not be completely aware of their surroundings. They can have difficulty chewing and swallowing. They might have lack of balance and a head tilt. They might have an abnormal eye position, and they can have seizures. The horse in this image is actually showing some head pressing behavior, which is pretty common for when the brain is affected by a virus. So how do we diagnose EHV-1? And the answer is PCR, polymerase chain reaction for viral DNA. Not all nasal swabs were created equally. We know now that we have the best chance of and the most sensitivity of getting a result correct when we use a rayon swab rather than a cotton swab. And then we really need to insert that swab up a horse's nose, twirl it around a little bit, needs to have a couple seconds there of contact. And then we do it on the other side as well. Any type of dirt or debris that's in a horse's nose also has the potential to inhibit the PCR. And so we try and do this as carefully as we can. We also submit a whole blood sample, and that's to check for viremia. Is there virus actually within the blood at this point in time with the horse? I recommend that we submit both of these samples on every horse that we're concerned about for EHV-1. It's important to note that the lab and the test that runs the PCR needs to be USDA certified to be confirmed for EHV-1 for horses. So which horses should we test? We should definitely test horses with clinical signs of disease. And so again, horses that have a fever or are lethargic, if they have any respiratory signs, or if they develop these neurologic signs. We always wonder, should we test asymptomatic horses if they've been exposed? And the answer is a bit complicated, and it's probably not. One reason we shouldn't is because if we get a false negative, then that's a false sense of security, right? That horse might be in the incubation period. No test is 100% sensitive all the time, and so that's a false sense of security. And then additionally, if we get an asymptomatic horse that tests positive, we're wondering, is it even associated with the outbreak that's going on, or is this horse's own latent recrudescing virus? And then finally, it's hard to tell whether or not a PCR positive in every case means that this horse is shedding enough virus to infect other horses. So it's probably best that we just test the horses that have clinical signs of disease. Okay, so coming on to treatment, what do we have as an option for EHM? How can we treat these horses that have developed neurologic disease? And our treatments, they can be rudimentary in the backyard, doing what you can. And then, of course, if you have the option to get your horse to a referral center that has the capacity for 24/7 monitoring and a sling in a stall if they need it, that's obviously the best thing for your horse. Our treatment goals are antivirals. We'd like to reduce that vasculitis and inflammation that's causing disease. We'd like to prevent or then treat any blood coagulation. Sling care to keep horses standing if they need it. And then really important is that supportive nursing care. Okay, so what anti-inflammatory treatments we have out there? All horses know, or all horse owners know about our NSAIDs and steroids, right? So non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are bute and banamine. And then corticosteroids we do use as well. They're the most potent anti-inflammatory that's out there. And they're an anti-vasculitis drug as well. They're the best thing we've got to prevent inflammation of those small blood vessels. However, steroids are immune suppressants, and we want this horse's immune system to be as robust as possible. So we generally reserve steroids for horses with neurologic signs. Now, I'm talking about medications here, and my caveat is that your veterinarian is the best one to tell you what medications your horse needs. So these are our general recommendations for general EHM patient, but your veterinarian is the one that needs to be making that call and that we trust to make that call. Now, antivirals, we've got some antivirals out there for horses. The one that we end up using most frequently is valacyclovir or Valtrex. Ganciclovir is an intravenous antiviral that we can use, particularly for horses that are neurologic. Now, it's important to note that these antivirals prevent viral replication. That does not kill the virus. And so our goal of this treatment is to stop the virus from replicating, and then hopefully the horse's immune system is competent enough that it can take care of the rest of the virus. Unfortunately, the best results for antiviral treatment are before virus exposure or before clinical signs of disease. And we've got a couple of studies validating this. We have found that if you give valacyclovir to horses either before they're exposed or before they develop neurologic disease, they have a lower level of viremia. So the virus is not as prevalent in their bloodstream. We've also found that the severity of neurologic signs are decreased for horses that receive valacyclovir before they get exposed to EHV-1. Now, that's kind of a tall order, right? We can't really have horses living on valacyclovir. How we've ended up using this study is we've considered horses that have been exposed to EHV-1 before they develop any clinical signs, starting them on valacyclovir. And I have in a little bit, I have a slide talking about that, but it does seem to have been helpful in preventing some of these EHM cases or decreasing mortality rate in EHV-1 outbreaks. Another new treatment that's out there is anticoagulants. And so there's two different options for anticoagulation that work really well and have been tested in horses. One is aspirin. So aspirin is an antiplatelet drug that prevents the platelet plug formation in blood clots. And platelets are, one of the two different factors that cause that blood clot. So if you can prevent that through aspirin, that's fantastic. Heparin is another medication that we can give, and it works in two ways. It actually prevents the virus-induced activation of the coagulation cascade as well as platelet activation, and then it limits the clotting of small blood vessels that supply the brain and spinal cord with oxygen. And so oftentimes we'll give our horses that develop EHM or develop a fever during an EHM outbreak, we'll start them on treatment with either aspirin or heparin. And then oftentimes our supportive nursing care ends up being our most important factor. We can give horses intravenous fluids and intravenous nutrition if they're unable to keep themselves hydrated or to eat. We can manage them in a sling if necessary. And this is really important that our horses that lay down and are unable to get up on their own. One of the things that we're taught in vet school is that a down horse doesn't survive very long. They're not meant to stay down very long, and their respiratory muscles get very tired. Their GI tract stops working. So if we can support them in a sling and keep them standing for at least part of the day, that can be really helpful in their recovery and survival. Because the neurologic signs that we see often cause urinary incontinence, in many cases we'll have to place a urinary catheter to keep their bladders empty. And then while they're in the sling, we can actually do some physical therapy during their recovery to try and rebuild those spinal cord neural tracts and try and get them moving and walking again. Here's an example of a horse with a urinary catheter. This is a lovely picture of a mare. Here's her urinary catheter. The girls are always a little easier to manage than the boys, but this mare was an EHM case who I'm happy to say did make it. Okay, so how do these cases do? What's the outcome and recovery that we expect after EHM? We're going to be talking both about morbidity and mortality. And morbidity is the number of exposed horses that develop clinical signs, whereas mortality is the number of horses that died or were euthanized as a result of the disease. And I will say that each outbreak is different, but there are some general trends that these outbreaks do follow. In general, morbidity is 80 to 90%. So EHV-1 is a pretty effective virus at causing disease. The number of horses that get EHM, though, after having EH1 is generally somewhere in the 30 to 40%. So of the horses that test positive for EHV-1 and have clinical signs, about 30 to 40% of them do develop neurologic signs. And then of the horses that develop neurologic signs, we generally see somewhere between a 15 and 30% mortality rate, unfortunately, from these horses. There's a lot of things that can impact horse outcome, and the availability of resources does matter. And we saw this in this outbreak. Referral hospitals with dedicated nursing staff and isolation facilities is really, really important. And then unfortunately, finances do come into play, right? Veterinary medicine, as much as we would like to give it away for free when horses need it, it's just not. And finances unfortunately do come into play when we consider these cases. However, we are making strides in improving outcomes with EHM. We had a really great publication out of Europe that showed a decreased amount of neurologic disease developing in horses that received heparin in treatments. And then I was really happy to be a part of this study in Virginia, where we did a combined treatment with valacyclovir and heparin, and we saw a reduced incidence of EHM and improved survival during a naturally occurring EHV-1 outbreak. This has been presented at AAEP, hoping to get it published here real soon. But I think this is a game changer for our treatment of horses that are EHV-1 positive. We do know there are some things that are associated with outcome in horses and survival. Over a couple different outbreaks, we've seen trends with temperature. So if a horse has a high fever, greater than 103.5, if they're unable to stand on their own and they don't have access to a sling, or if they have signs of brain dysfunction, they are more likely to die or be euthanized as a result of this disease. I will say that you can't apply statistics to individual cases. We've all had cases that we thought, by the book, this horse should not survive and have made it. And so I always warn people, don't apply those statistics to your individual cases. Because these guys can survive and can go back to work. It's one of our great EHM cases that we had at Marion duPont Scott, and this horse did fantastically well and is currently being ridden. So Dr. Flynn's going to talk a lot about prevention and biosecurity, and I'm going to let her have that because that's her area of expertise. But we know that the horse's general health matters, and there's some data that lysine and zinc supplements may be helpful in keeping your horse healthy and having them have a robust immune system. I will give people plenty of warnings that these supplements are not USDA or FDA approved. We cannot say for sure exactly what's in them or how much. So use your best judgment with these supplements. It felt wrong not to include them though, because there's been a lot of chat over the internet about these things. It's also just really important to monitor your own horse's wellness. Make sure you know your horse, and temperature checking twice daily, especially when you're traveling, is a really smart call. Now, one good question is, we do biosecurity, we do our best, right? But this is a virus that I told you can be latently infecting up to 80% of the horses that see this virus and can shed at any time. And so sometimes it just happens. Does vaccination help? Now, no vaccine is licensed to prevent EHM. Why do we even bother vaccinating then? Because we do know that vaccines decrease the level of viremia. They decrease the amount of virus that's in the bloodstream. And we also know that the vaccine decreases the amount of nasal shedding of the virus. So that means that your horse is less likely to get other horses infected. Okay, so moving on from EHV-1, I hope that was a good coverage. If you guys do have questions that you put in the Q&A that we do not get to at the end of the webinar, we're going to get a printout of them and we'll do an FAQ post on EDCC again. We'll do that on our Facebook page. We'll do it on our website. A lot of people, this is your first time knowing about Equine Disease Communication Center and the EDCC role. And so our mission statement is to improve the health and welfare of horses. We'd like to communicate real-time alerts and information to help prevent the spread and mitigate equine infectious diseases. So how does it work? Veterinarians or state animal health officials submit cases to the EDCC. For diseases that are designated reportable within the state, the EDCC confirms the state has received and has knowledge of the case, and in many cases confirms that they have a quarantine in place. No one wants to hear about their barn mate's horse being sick over Facebook, right? That's not how we want to do things. And so if a veterinarian reports to us that a horse has EHM in your barn, we confirm that the state veterinarian has knowledge of that case, has contacted the important people, and has a quarantine in place before we post that on our website or post it on Facebook. And then we do post the alert. So it goes on our website, it goes on Facebook, and if your veterinarian is a subscriber to the EDCC listserv, they get an email about it every day. We also do our best to synthesize outbreak information. And so we have a news page for EDCC, and we've been doing our best to keep up with this outbreak as the cases have come in. On our alerts page, it's highly navigable, so you can search for a particular disease, you can search for a state, and you can search for a timeline. You can click on your state and you can see all of the diseases that have been reported to the EDCC. And then on our news page, we have a particular page dedicated to this outbreak where we're reporting EHV-1 cases that are positive with no neurologic signs, cases that are positive with neurologic signs, and ones that are positive with no clinical signs at all in the states that they're coming from. Our website is also a source of accurate information. There's a lot of inaccurate information out there. And so we do have disease information pages for all of the relevant infectious diseases. We have fact sheets and then links to reliable sources. AAEP is generally one of our most reliable sources. We also have some links to USDA updates as well. And that's it for me. That's all of my slideshow. I really appreciate being invited to be in this webinar, and I hope you guys have found the EDCC useful.
We have a lot of applause hands going up over the screen. Thank you so much, Dr. Estell. We're going to go next to Dr. Dinges. I am going to share his screen. And then hang on just a sec. So many buttons to push. Okay. All right, Dr. Dinges, I am ready when you are. Just holler when you're ready to change a slide.
You bet. Thank you so much. And hope everybody can hear me okay there. And my name is Bud Dinges. I'm the Executive Director and State Veterinarian here in the state of Texas. I am a 1995 graduate of the Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine. I was in private mixed animal practice for about 5 years after that here in Southeast Texas. And then was fortunate enough to go back and teach at the Department of Large Animal Clinical Sciences there at A&M for a little over 17 years. I left there and went to work for Boehringer Ingelheim as a beef cattle tech service veterinarian for a little over a year. I've been with the Animal Health Commission since 2019 as a field veterinarian, and I entered this role in October of 2023. So here we are today in Texas in November of 2025. So you can go to the next slide there, if you don't mind. Yeah, so a little bit about the Texas Animal Health Commission. We are a standalone agency here in the state of Texas. We are legislatively mandated to protect all livestock, exotic livestock, domestic and exotic fowl from specific diseases. And that authorizes us to make and enforce regulations to prevent, control, and eradicate specific infectious animal diseases which endanger livestock. So you can go to the next slide, if you will. So just a little bit about the EHM outbreak here in Texas. What we've we first notified, I guess, the wee hours of the morning of November the 18th. One of our region directors received communication from a equine veterinarian in his region that he had horses showing clinical signs consistent with EHM. And he proceeded on that morning to visit with some other equine veterinarians in the area and learned that we had several other horses showing clinical signs and had upwards of potentially 15 horses that had been either put down or died from EHM. So turned out that we were having our commission meeting that morning We wrapped that up about noontime that day, and then obviously our field region offices there and our epi staff started to work on this earlier that morning, but they worked with the veterinarians and horse owners to confirm those cases of EHM, and then tried to find a common denominator of those affected horses. And turns out we did find a common event, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But we reached out to the event sponsor to notify them of what we were seeing in these horses, and just communicated to them what next steps were. I reached out to Dr. Rod Hall. Actually received a message from him later that morning that they had started to hear of some EHM cases, or horses showing clinical signs of EHM there in Oklahoma. So reached out to Dr. Myrick there in Louisiana. They had received some horses at Louisiana State LSU College of Veterinary Medicine. We were receiving horses admitted to the Texas A&M's large animal clinic there at College Station, and they had reached out or receiving some horses there at the Oklahoma State College of Veterinary Medicine, also showing clinical signs of EHM. We did begin our disease confirmation investigation and epidemiologic tracing. I knew kind of what was about to start in Arizona at the latter part of November, and then in December, the equine events there in Las Vegas. And I reached out to Dr. Walker there in Arizona and Dr. Rolfe there in Las Vegas, and conveyed to them what we were seeing here in Texas, just to kind of give them a heads up. Later on that evening, we had one of the large PRCA rodeos here in Texas reach out to us, and we kind of advised them, or thought it out of abundance for caution, that it would be best that they probably cancel. They had a qualifying event for their February rodeo. I thought it might be best to go ahead and cancel that or postpone that event till a later date. Moving later on that evening, we did receive the contestant information from the event there in Waco, which we'll talk about in just a second. But we started doing our trace work there in November. The next day, on November the 19th, we began notifying owners of exposed horses and placing hold orders on those horses. And then we were learning of other events, equine events around the state, that some of these confirmed affected horses, infected horses attended. And then we had a NASAHO call, National Assembly of State Animal Health Officials call there on the 19th as well. You can go to the next slide if you would like, please. So we did identify the common event there that took place on November the 5th through the 9th, the WPRA World Finals and Elite Barrel Race there, held there in Waco, Texas. There were 670 contestants in those two events. Those contestants were from 31 states, including Texas, and then had 4 Canadian provinces. But there were 497 contestants from Texas. 173 of those were from other states and the Canadian provinces. And we sent those traces out to those other states. And we were, learning over the next day or two that a lot of those horses and contestants were still here in Texas competing. So you can go to the next slide if you don't mind. So as far as regulatory process goes, I did reach out to our Texas area veterinarian in charge, Dr. Collins here in Texas. I reached out to Dr. Pelzel McCluskey, the USDA Veterinary Services Equine epidemiologist, just to let her know what was going on. Did reach out to our governor's office here in Texas just to let them know, because the equine industry is quite large here in Texas. Just wanted to let them know what was going on, what we were seeing. So, throughout the day there and continued on receiving reports from other veterinarians and horse owners, receiving positive reports from diagnostic labs. We just continued our epidemiologic investigation and animal disease traceability process, to verify what we were seeing and acting on what we were being reported. We did want to report accurate information to the EDCC. Next slide, please. So our region offices began issuing hold orders, like I mentioned, the next day on the 19th to exposed horses, and then putting the infected horses under quarantine. We were restricting the movement of those exposed horses for 21 days. We were asking that they, if it was a vet clinic or affected premises, to isolate the infected horses. And actually, the exposed horses, we were asking them to keep temperature logs of those exposed horses, and they would have to submit those to our region offices to be released from those hold orders. We wanted to make sure that the vet clinics and veterinarians and horse owners were notifying us of additional cases, any mortalities they were continued to see, and the clinical signs in horses, make sure they were continuing to report those. And they also wanted to convey to them to enhance their biosecurity on the affected premises. So you can go to the next slide, if you don't mind. So our communications department, or outreach through that department there, obviously our exposed equine, we were sending a contestant letter making them aware that those horses were at the event, and that their horses were potentially exposed to those positive horses. We also sent out the hold orders and also some biosecurity guidance to those exposed equine owners. The event sponsors that were continuing to have events, we making recommendations on how to go about that. We did recommend that they probably postpone or cancel any event where the horses were being commingled until we found out how severe this infection and outbreak involved was. So we also sent us some guidance documents on how to have biosecurity at those events if they were going to have events where equine were being commingled. Then we put out a press release, released accurate and verified updates to the EDCC. And then we released notifications on our social media sites. And then we've been doing quite a few media interviews as well over the last week. And we did send out communications to authorized veterinarians to make sure that they were notifying us of positive cases or suspect cases, and issuing guidance documents to them as well. Next slide, please. So the current situation, we've identified 16 Texas events here involving a positive equine, or positive horses that they participated in. And then we've got 8 more that we are looking into. We're obviously doing the trace work out of that and notifying potentially exposed horses and owners of those exposures. So far, we've got over 1,500 epidemiologic traces. There are 34 other states that have traces in 4 Canadian provinces. Today in Texas, we report 19 positive cases that we've confirmed. We have confirmed 4 deaths associated with this outbreak, and there are 7 other states with positive horses, I believe, are being reported today. So next slide. I think that should wrap up what I have to share, but certainly appreciate this opportunity to discuss the outbreak, how it has affected Texas, and just thanks for having us on the webinar today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dinges. That was, you also have a lot of applause and hearts going by the screen. We really appreciate you're coming on with us tonight, and we know you're right in the thick of things. Dr. Flynn, I think it's your turn now. So I see your slideshow, but it's not in presentation mode quite yet.
Yeah, I'm trying. There it goes. Can you see it now?
There it is.
Okay.
Okay, we're good. I love the lop ears on that horse.
Thanks. Thanks, Karen. And thanks to the EDCC and the AAEP for putting this on tonight. Greatly appreciate being involved in this webinar. Just as background, I'm currently the Equine Health and Biosecurity Veterinarian for the U.S. Equestrian Federation. I've been here since March of 2023. Prior to that, I've spent 20 plus years as a state animal health official, 3 years as the state veterinarian for Kentucky, and 20 years in California, the majority of that time with the California Department of Food and Agriculture as their equine veterinarian for the department. When Krista spoke about her EHV outbreak, I was one of those veterinarians in charge of that situation during Ogden. I have about 40 plus EHV outbreaks under my belt, so this is not new to me. Everything from the Ogden large outbreak to smaller local outbreaks. And so I'm here as a biosecurity person speaking because I learned the lessons the hard way. And after Ogden, we realized we really needed information for biosecurity related to equine events specifically. And so what I'm going to present today is focusing on not just biosecurity at the equine premises, but answering some of those questions about when should we consider events, when can we go to events, and some of our recommendations for future events. So with that being said, I just want to remind folks first that preventing the perfect storm is really what we're talking about, or preventing the disease outbreak. This may be an event center in the middle. However, if we think about this, it's actually going to be any facility that we are talking about. So when we think about that is where the horses are located. And when we bring in pathogen, we have to figure out how we're bringing these pathogens into the facility and what are those critical control points. Well, that critical control point is the horse that's entering. So ensuring that those healthy horses are entering, or putting those horses in isolation before they're mixed into the larger population. So we also think about once that pathogen, which in this case is the EHV-1 virus, is in the facility. And you have to remember, as Krista mentioned, this virus is in the horse. It is latently in most of these horses, and those horses periodically shed this virus. So we say the virus is ubiquitous, meaning it is in the environment at many times of the year. Specifically in the colder, damper times of the year, this virus likes moist, cold, damp areas. And so we have to think about that's how the pathogen survives. And once it's surviving, it can be transmitted to multiple horses. And that's when we need to think about how is it shed, as Krista said also, that it is shed from the respiratory tract. So how are we connecting the horse's respiratory secretions that may be on a water bucket or whatever fomite that can carry that? So we also have to think about what are those sick horses and how do they become sick and how do we identify them? Because we need to control it by identifying those early and isolating them to prevent any further spread. And unfortunately, we have to also think about how those viruses may be leaving the facility. And leaving the facility is when the horse leaves, the equipment leaves, or people leave. It can leave on any one of those items. So what is our biosecurity and restrictions leaving that vent or that venue? So here are the facts. Number one, we cannot eliminate all risks. There is always going to be risk of disease. And again, EHVs in the environment, sometimes we see more of it, sometimes we see less of it. Horses will get sick. That's one thing we have to remember. There is horses getting sick, not just with EHV, but other infectious disease agents. And how do we prevent all of this? Well, biosecurity is really the key to minimizing these impacts of these diseases. So we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges when we look at either an equine event facility or a boarding facility or your own backyard. Think of all the entry points that are things that are coming into your facility. We not only have the horses, we have the allied health professionals, whether that's the veterinarians, the chiropractor, the massage therapist, the farrier. All of those are coming in. We have tractors and equipment that are coming in. Are you sharing equipment with a neighboring farm? We have to think about all the feed, the hay, the grain. Where's that coming from? And when we think of horse facilities, we have a lot of larger facilities where how are we getting around those facilities? It used to be bicycles, but I guess I should update this with segways and skateboards and golf carts, ATVs. All of that can be carrying pathogens. And the other things we have to think about is all the equipment that comes in with the horses and all the people that come in with the horses. You know, who's touching your horses? Who's coming in? We always want to show off our horses to our friends, our family, but are we letting them touch every horse down the aisleway? Those are some of our challenges when we think about entry for pathogens and how they're coming in. And again, on most of our facilities, they're designed for human convenience. And what I mean by that is we don't want to walk very far. We want our horses stabled right next to the in gate. The closer to the in gate, the better it is. So let's put all the stables all around the show arenas and compact everybody into a very small location. Well, that's great for human design, but that's also a great way to spread disease and pathogens. So we have to think about how these are set up, because how much separation is that between each barn? And then we have these mega barns with 100 horses in it. Well, that whole barn is now going to be exposed if a sick horse is walking up and down the aisleways. So we have to think about, are we building smaller barns? Are we building them so that we can separate them in the event of a disease outbreak? And that goes into design of our barns. What is that stabling material? What is it made of? Can horses touch each other? Are there bars? That's great for ventilation. In the summer, I understand some of these facilities, we need to keep the bars so that we can have good ventilation. But again, we also have to think about the increased disease risk that this does present to us. So we also have the different materials that we are using to build these stalls. If you look at the wood on the lower left of your screen, that's a really surface where horses have chewed it up, and those chewed up surfaces can really harbor the bacteria and viruses. So it's going to take a lot of scrubbing. That means cleaning, not just throwing the disinfectant, not just throwing the bleach at it and saying it's clean. We really need to scrub those with a surfactant or something that's going to be like a degreaser to get those surfaces cleaned before we apply the disinfectant. So again, disinfectant is going to be dependent upon what your surface that you're disinfecting. We talk about using bleach. Well, just remember, a 10% bleach solution is deactivated by any organic material. That means all the manure that's left behind, all the shavings that are left behind, that's all going to deactivate your materials. Excuse me, your disinfectant. The other thing to keep in mind is there are some disinfectants like an intervention product, an accelerated hydrogen peroxide, that does work in the presence of organic material. So that selection becomes critical, not only on what surface it is, but what of those disinfectants have an effective claim against EHV-1. So in an outbreak situation, you want to make sure you're using a disinfectant that is going to A, work on the surface that you want it to work on, work in the presence of organic material, and work with the EHV-1 virus. So it's important to read the label, to look at the label to see what is working for EHV-1. So when we think about how this virus is spread, horse-to-horse contact becomes a challenge. So we have the wash rack, we have the stalls, we have the outside of the arenas and the exercise areas. And one of the biggest concerns, I would say, is when they're close together. Now, when we tie them up to fences in between classes or between events, this is an increased risk as they're tightly commingling together, whether they're nose to nose, like the picture on the left, or the picture in the middle and the picture on the right. The picture in the middle and on the right are the same horses, just one is a close-up. If you looked around this entire facility at this particular point in time, there were horses tied around the entire arena. So when we do this type of activity, we need to understand there is a risk for horse-to-horse contact and transmission of pathogens. The other risk when we think about it is horses that are drinking out of water buckets. If they're communal water troughs, that's an increased risk because we're sharing pathogens without cleaning and disinfecting between it. And it's important to understand there's a published study out there that shows that the virus, EHV-1 virus, can last 21 days in communal water sources. So when we think about that, we also have to think about the horse that's sniffing the hose that's being put in the bucket, because as he sniffs the hose and you go to the next bucket, you're going to have that horse now exposed to the virus or pathogen if that horse had it. So we also don't ever want to submerge that hose in the bucket, because you also are going to submerge it potentially to get contaminated with virus before you bring it to the next horse. The other biosecurity risk we need to think about, whether we're at a show or we're at our home premises, is our shared equipment. Remember, what is around the nose? What goes around the nose? The bridles, they go around the nose. The halters, they go around the nose. Putting them on a bridle rack together could cause a transmission of virus and virus or bacteria. The cross ties are another example as horses sniff them. But I guess I have to admit my biggest pet peeve would be using the same nose rag on multiple horses. We don't share tissues. Why would we share a nose rag between horses? So what are our potential mitigations? Well, we'll start at the entry point to the premises. So making sure your horses are entering healthy. If you don't know their health status, they need to be put in isolation. And how do we know a horse is healthy? We should be taking the temperatures 3 days or 5 days prior to entry to the premises and knowing what that temperature is. Now, there's a great tool out there. There are biothermal microchips. Those microchips will read the temperature of the horse. It'll show up on the microchip reader that is for that biothermal chip. And there are apps out there that are showing the graphing of that horse's temperature, as that is shown for this Emerald Dock horse. You can see an elevated temperature. You can see what that horse's normal temperature is without having to do a rectal temperature, staying safe while you're doing it, and it's very quick and easy. So the other thing to keep in mind is always have an area for isolation if you're bringing in horses and you don't know what their status is and you want to monitor them. A horse with a temperature over 101.5, which is our cutoff for a fever, is not a healthy horse. We have to remember only healthy horses should be transported or competed. So anything over 101.5 should be investigated by a veterinarian to determine what the cause is. Not all fevers are infectious. However, you want to make sure that that fevered horse is not infectious and a risk to other horses. So what are some of the other mitigation efforts you can do while you're on the premises of the show barn or on a boarding facility? Mandatory twice daily temperature reporting would be ideal. As we talk about, there's an increase in temperature in these horses, and it can be biphasic, where it means it goes up and goes down. So we want to make sure we are able to catch that elevated temperature, hence the reason why we recommend twice daily at a minimum. Those temperatures should be taken when the horses are not medicated, meaning they have not been given any non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, which would impact the temperature taking. So before any butyrbandamine, these temperatures should be taken. These temperatures should not be taken after the horse exercises, as that is going to elevate the temperature. It's important to note that your horse's temperature will change from morning to night. So we need to make sure that you're tracking your specific horse's temperature, because they will vary a little bit. When you have a fever, it needs to be reported to a veterinarian again so that you can monitor that horse to determine what the cause of that fever is. As we talked about, the fever is the first sign of any potential infectious disease. In the case of herpes and in the case of strangles, the temperature goes up before that horse sheds any virus or bacteria. So if you can isolate that horse that is detected at the initial fever, you're preventing other horses from getting exposed. So it's really important that that fevered horse be immediately isolated, as well as any horses showing clinical signs of illness, such as nasal discharge or diarrhea. We also want to make sure there's compliance with basic biosecurity protocols on the premises. Each premises is going to have their unique risks. Each premises should identify what those risks are and speak to a veterinarian to determine how to best address the specific premises risks. As I said before, routine cleaning and disinfecting of common areas, such as stabling or exercise areas, is important. And again, it's important to use the appropriate disinfectant for the surface and for the disease agent that you're concerned with. And above all, preventing horse-to-horse contact is essential, as well as ensuring you are not acting as a fomite. So making sure that anytime you're dealing with a sick horse or a horse with an elevated temperature, you're not working with other horses. You can properly clean and disinfect your hands or any equipment with a disinfectant or hand sanitizer to reduce those transmission risks. Remember, an outbreak starts with an index case. How you manage that first single case may determine the extent of an outbreak. So whether that horse is a febrile horse with a temperature over 101.5, or that horse is a neurologic horse, has nasal discharge, or a horse with diarrhea, that horse should be evaluated by a veterinarian and ideally put in isolation. That ain't doing right horse today needs to be further evaluated by a veterinarian and also continued taking that temperature because you don't know what tomorrow holds for that horse. I will also say continued monitoring of temperatures is critical in an outbreak situation. I always get asked, when should I isolate the horse? Well, immediately is going to be your key. If you can stop an outbreak by immediately isolating that febrile horse, you may prevent any future horses from being exposed. At the time a horse starts showing clinical signs, specifically neurologic signs, there's likely to be a large virus load that is being excreted from that horse. And that potential horse, because so many people are handling it, becomes a potential source and nidus for infection and exposing additional horses. So again, testing that febrile horse with nasal swab for respiratory pathogens is critical. And I often get asked, where can we isolate a horse? We don't have room. Do you have a run-in shed? Do you have pipe corrals? Or do you have temporary stalls that you can throw up in a parking lot? That is easy to say and do when you plan ahead. At last minute, as we are right now, looking for temporary stalls in the areas of the Southwest may be quite challenging because they may all be at one venue for an event. So it's important to think ahead and even purchase panels that you can just throw up in your either in a parking lot, an arena. I have made it work where we have placed these pipe corrals in an arena because we had nothing else. And you just space them out 30 feet apart so they're not close together. And that's where you're going to have to manage your sick horses. So again, planning ahead and having just some panels can really save you from further exposing additional horses. So when we think about what are your immediate actions if you suspect an infectious disease, the number one immediate action is isolate sick horses. Number two is we need to identify who are the exposed horses. That may be a complete inventory of the barn, the premises, or the event. But we need to look further and clarify what does exposure mean. Exposure definitely means any horses that have been handled by the same person, cared for by the same person, or has had equipment shared between them. So typically that's the same trainer, owner, or manager or rider. The other thing that we have to think about is going to be discipline dependent. So do we have a braider that is going from horse to horse? That may extend into another barn, another area. What are the protocols taken by those folks that have come on the premises? Now, we know veterinarians are practicing biosecurity and some of the allied health professionals, they're practicing their biosecurity. So we need to make sure we continue those biosecurity practices at all levels where we're cleaning and disinfecting equipment. We're not treating healthy horses after we've treated sick horses. So those come down to your biosecurity measures. And I would like to say the 5 top tips that I say that are the bare minimum for biosecurity is limiting horse-to-horse contact, limiting human contact with horses to the essential personnel that need to touch that horse, avoiding sharing of equipment that's not been cleaned and disinfected between uses, avoiding the communal water, and most importantly, monitoring your horse's health. Number 1, temperature taking twice daily and reporting any temperatures over 101.5 to a veterinarian or any clinical signs to a veterinarian for further evaluation. And most importantly, everyone has to be on the same page. You must have a communication plan in the event a disease outbreak occurs. Somebody must be in charge. Somebody must be responsible for communicating to everyone on the premises of the situation. What is the status? What is the protocols in place? And what do we do if we see a sick horse? Everyone must do their part to keep the horses healthy and the equine premises safe. It is not a one-man job. It is not the responsibility just of the owner or trainer of the sick horse. Everybody plays a role, and everybody must do their part to protect all of the horse population in the United States. So I get this question a lot, and here we go. Should I go to an event? Well, the first thing you have to do is say, is your horse healthy? Your horse has had no exposure to horses of the discipline involved, not commingling with those horses that have been involved. Your horse's health status is monitored, and that doesn't mean I just look at the horse every day. That actually means taking the temperature. That actually means looking and making sure that their feed consumption's normal, their urine and fecal and urine output is normal, that all parameters are normal on this horse, and this horse is current on their vaccinations. And a current vaccination in accordance with the AAEP guidelines for vaccination for EHV is every 6 months. Those horses that are moving frequently should be vaccinated for EHV-1. You should also check once you have a healthy horse, you have your vaccination, you have your health certificates and all your documents. You are consulting with your veterinarian to determine what is in the geographic area as far as disease risk, and you're checking the Equine Disease Communication Center. As Krista alluded to, we will post the confirmed cases on that website. So once you have made those decisions, you might also want to look into what are the biosecurity protocols for the event. Do they have a healthy horse entry protocol? Do they have venue biosecurity protocols? Is there required health monitoring, temperature recording and reporting? Is there a management protocol for sick horses, meaning do they have an isolation protocol? All of these are questions you should be asking the event organizer, and those event organizers should be the ones to be able to provide you that information, whether it's already on their website or you have to contact them to get that information. Because you need to make an educated decision on whether or not you should go to this event. So why does USEF support USEF competitions continuing? Because we have protocols in place. We have successfully managed EHV on 3 occasions where there were quarantines on site by the state, and we continued to show those horses that were not exposed. We quickly identified the sick horse, quickly isolated the sick horses, and quickly identified any exposed horses and put them under quarantine. We have that in place. We did that successfully because we have rules in place. Number one rule we have is we have a requirement for EHV and influenza vaccinations within 6 months prior to entry to the venue. We have a mandatory reporting to competition managers and veterinarians of fevers. We have mandatory reporting of horses suspected with infectious diseases. We have mandatory reporting of any horse which has been transported to a veterinary clinic for suspected infectious diseases. All of those reports come directly to me from either the veterinarian of the show or from competition management, and I work directly with them to address any of these situations. And for reportable diseases, I work directly with the state animal health official, the state veterinarian's office. We also have mandatory compliance with USEF, competition, state, or federal biosecurity requirements. We take this very seriously, and we have issued violations and a fine of up to $8,000 and a 4-month suspension for an individual who did not comply with biosecurity requirements. We take this very seriously, and we also make sure that all of our events that have on-site stabling have an isolation plan and an action plan, meaning where do those horses go if they are sick. For larger events, they must have isolation on site. And I have visited those venues to ensure that these biosecurity plans and isolation plans are in fact true to what they say and how they're going to do it. And we have a requirement for official show veterinarian, and that official show veterinarian has communications in advance of the event of all of our biosecurity protocols and our contact information specifically for me in the event of a disease outbreak. So all of these are the reasons why we strongly support competitions continuing once they consult with their local veterinarian and their state animal health official to determine the status of disease in their area. They must utilize enhanced biosecurity in order to continue these operations, and I have been in communication with shows that are occurring in the next couple of weeks. USEF will host an EHV update webinar on Monday, December 1st, kind of a continuation from this one, to provide additional guidance as the outbreak continues. We're hoping to see less cases. We hope that we have got this contained. However, we want to make sure we provide an opportunity to provide additional information and resources to all individuals. So with that, I will open it up to Krista if you have any closing remarks, or Dr. Dinges or Bud if you have any closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Flynn. Y'all, that webinar on Monday with USEF, I will include a link to that in the description of the YouTube on demand. So feel free to go catch that as well. We are happy to try to share as much information as possible with everybody. And that, again, is what the EDCC is here for. So make sure that you're able to get there. I've stuck the link in a whole bunch of times, but it's equinediseasecc.org. And we would love to have you visit that a lot. It should tell you lots of things. A couple of really quick questions that I saw go by. Someone asked if other equids can get EHV-1. Like the specific question was mini donkeys.
Yes, any equid in the equid family can. I will say a caveat is mules typically are asymptomatic and they can be a super shedder. I've had experience where they were the silent shedders in the whole population and causing more problems. So
Ooh.
Yes, all equids.
That's kind of terrifying. What about non-equids? Someone asked, what about the dogs that run around at the showgrounds?
From a biosecurity standpoint, that is a risk. No dog should be running loose by horses, period. Because what happens with dogs, they do not get sick, first of all. I should clarify that. Their risk is as a fomite. When a horse sniffs one dog, sniffs the dog, and then the dog goes to the next horse, that virus is on the dog, and we have a potential risk factor.
And then several people are just wondering when things are going to be back to normal. We're getting all kinds of
Well, normal is
notifications
a
that things are
relative term in the horse world.
okay, yeah.
Relative term. Again, I'm going to say this. Disease can happen anywhere, anytime. So practicing good biosecurity. For this outbreak, we just need to monitor. We have to monitor for the potential for secondary exposure. We've gotten through the first exposures from the initial event. And so I would say we're looking at secondary exposure, and we will know in a couple days to see if we have secondary in exposures. Krista or Bud, I don't know if you want to add. Oh, Krista, you're muted somehow.
Yeah, it doesn't look like you're muted, but you're muted. Did you go to sleep?
Maybe we can try now. How about
Yep.
that?
Yep.
That works. Thank you.
Okay. So Dr. Ginges maybe can comment about what's happening in Texas. And I think that he'd be the best one to comment on that. I think that this is a wake-up call, though, right? It's been a minute since this has happened. And so let's make sure that we've got a good plan in place for when and if it does.
You bet. We're still investigating potential events where these horses moved. Some of these horses went to 2 or 3 events in a day. So yeah, it's definitely a wake-up call.
So I will share this list of questions that you all have put in the Q&A and in the chat. And I'm going to throw all those at Dr. Estell. And she said she would try to add the answers to some of them, at least, to the FAQ on the EDCC page. So yeah, we will try to get answers to you. But again, I think a lot of them are already out there. I'm seeing, honestly, a lot of really good information out there from veterinary clinics that are sharing, and of course, AAEP and EDCC. Be careful about Dr. Google. Should we mention ivermectin?
Let's not.
For those of you not actually watching at the moment, Dr. Flynn shook her head rather vehemently when I mentioned ivermectin. So yeah, no, that's not a thing.
I think what we'll do also is we'll try to make sure on Monday's webinar that we also try to answer some of these questions that it came up.
That would be great.
So, yep.
Yeah, so Monday's webinar. Yeah, Monday's webinar at USEF. You can go to usef.org and probably hunt down the link to the webinar from there.
And Lynn Taylor has mentioned on the chat twice about our biosecurity risk calculator, and I should have plugged that. Thank you so much for that reminder. If you don't know where your facility fits in Dr. Flynn's biosecurity plan, go ahead and take that very leading quiz, and you'll get some information about what to do.
Yeah, that's a cool thing. So, all right. Well, I think that our timing is kind of perfect. We were scheduled to go 90 minutes, and look at that. So attendees, thank you so much. Again, we are so grateful that you're interested in keeping your horses healthy and comfortable, and that you're reaching out to find the really good information. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And again, I'm very sad that on the recording, you're not going to see all the hearts and the applause emojis that are going past, because it's really a beautiful thing to see. And of course, thank you so very much to our panelists who have just been going nonstop for the past, it's really only been like, what, a week? It seems like forever. But to be able to pull stuff together this quickly is a feat in itself. So thank you so very much to Drs. Bud Ginges, Katie Flynn, and Krista Estell. We are extremely grateful that you've come along for this. And yeah, remember, go to the EDCC to find out more information and go to your own personal vet. If they're not already on the EDCC mailing list, then encourage them to get on that. And you will have a good pipeline to the most up-to-date information. Okay, so with that, there's always a point in these webinars that I have to just hang up on everybody. There's no real cool way to do it, but I will ask our panelists to give us one last wave goodbye. I'm going to move my cat so that I can actually see the hang up button. And yeah, thanks again. And look tomorrow for an email that will give you a link to the on-demand recording. So you'll get that email. It comes from Zoom. So if you don't see it, check your junk mail. All right, I'm going to hang up on everybody. Thank you so very much. Oh, and thanks to Kevin Hinchman, my man behind the curtain who helps out for these. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, going to end it. Thank you, guys. Bye.
EDCC, Equine Disease Communication Center. How do you know how to avoid disease unless you know where it's at? This unifies the entire country for veterinarians, horse owners, all the horse-loving public to know where disease is. How can we trace it? How can we follow up? How can we prevent it coming to your backyard? Please donate.